Good morning. So our scripture reading for today is from the first chapter of Mark, verses 29 through 39. And immediately Jesus left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her. And Jesus came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. And the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sundown, they brought to Jesus all who were sick or oppressed or by demons. And the whole city was gathered together at the door. And Jesus healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons. And Jesus would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out." And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We've touched upon previously this idea of the messianic secret. Throughout Mark's gospel, we find that Jesus is preventing or trying to prevent his true identity from coming out. And so here we see this again. Right? The demons are not permitted to speak because they knew who Jesus was. And isn't it interesting? They know who he is. They know him, and he has power and authority over the demons. And so when we're placing our trust, when we're deciding to place our trust in Jesus Christ, we're doing so in someone who has authority over demons, and they know who he is. They recognize his authority, right? And so he has power over them. And so he's clearly, while he is in this world fully human, right? He is fully God. He is at work and active in the larger world around us. And so Rachel and I, last week, we had a week of vacation, and it was glorious. It was not the vacation that had initially been planned. This was plan C. Plan A had been these elaborate plans to go to Italy. We were going to be in northern Italy for a week. It was going to be glorious. We were really excited about it, and that was right. And then COVID happened, and so it got delayed. And then we said, hey, we're going to go to Lake Tahoe. And I'd never been there, heard it was great. And so we had it booked. We were super excited. I've always heard how beautiful it is. And then there was the fires, and I kept reading more and more about the air quality. And so we ended up driving to West Virginia, a very different type of vacation than what we had initially planned out. But it was beautiful. We spent a lot of time hiking in the New River National Park, and it was gorgeous to just be in the woods and the views there. And then we went up and we were driving along the Blue Ridge Parkway, and we would stop at the overlooks, and you could look out and see sort of the mountains in the distance, and it was just spectacular. And in that place, it's easy to experience awe and wonder and just get caught up in this beautiful world that God has made, and to feel at peace and feel calm and to see the miraculous around us. And it was just 6 days of these beautiful vistas, the feeling miraculous and getting a sense of God's power. And we went to an observatory one night when we were out in the middle of Virginia, and we're looking at the stars and the distant galaxies and the majesty with which God creates. It's easy to see at times like this. And then we came home, and our home is a lot louder, and the views are not quite as majestic, and getting back into the flow of work, and it's easy to think it's awe and wonder are reserved for sort of beautiful places for vacations. And here we're just trying to manage day by day and week by week is what it feels like a lot of the time. You end up sort of wondering where God is in the midst of everyday life. It's a lot easier to see God's penmanship in the world when you're out and removed, sort of on these expeditions. And so it's interesting here in our gospel reading. And so we're still in the first chapter of Mark, and so in many ways we're still in the introduction, and yet a lot of things have happened in Mark. And if you remember earlier in this, verses 16 to 20, Jesus called his first disciples. He called James and John. He called Simon and Andrew. They were out fishing, and Jesus said, I will make you fishers of men. And they were removed from their situation. It was sort of this dramatic exit from where they had been into this new way of life. And then Jesus starts to do these miraculous things. And it's very easy to see that, right? To see the miraculous. They've been removed out of their situation. And they probably think it's going to carry on like this forever. But then isn't it interesting that here in verse 29, it says, immediately Jesus left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. And so they have left, and yet then they've come back to Simon and Andrew's home, right? So they kind of went away, and then they're coming back home into sort of the life that Simon and Andrew are accustomed to, into the world that they know, into the ordinary. And yet Jesus is with them, and Jesus is transforming the ordinary into the extraordinary. For Simon's mother-in-law is ill with this fever. And, this is long before the advent of antibiotics, right? So this fever was likely this life-threatening disease. And there's this historical procedure to cure this. And it involved an iron knife being tied by hair to a thorn bush while certain passages were recited and magical formulas pronounced. This was this historical passage to heal this fever, because this fever may well have been very life-threatening. And so Jesus comes along, and here in the midst of the ordinary, right, Jesus is present there in the house. They've gone back home. And Jesus is there, and he does this miraculous thing. So he heals her. He takes her by the hand and lifts her up. And the word that is used there in the Greek is the same word that's used in Mark 16, that's used at the end of the Gospels, when it talks about how Jesus has been raised from the dead, right? The angel tells the women, he is not here, for he has been raised. And it's the same thing, the same word when Jesus says he takes her by the hand and lifts her up. And so here in Mark 1, we're already getting hints of the resurrection. Here in the ordinary, they've gone back to Simon and Andrew's home. In the midst of the ordinary, we're getting hints of the resurrection. We're getting extraordinary things happening because Jesus has entered into their home, into their ordinary lives, and he's brought signs of the resurrection. And she gets up and begins to serve, right? She has been set free from the disease which has ensnared her, which has captured her, which has sort of shrunk her life down, right? It's put all these limits on her life, and Jesus comes along and removes the limits on her life. And what does she do? She serves, right? That's what happens when Jesus sets us free. We are free to serve. And the word here that's used is the same that is used later on in the gospel when it says that Jesus came to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. Right? Jesus, who has the ultimate freedom, he lays that down to serve. And in the same way that you and I, when we pledge ourselves to Jesus Christ, when we are set free from sin, we are set free to serve God and to serve one another. Our freedom isn't just for us. It's not something we take just for our benefit, but it's something that's given to us, and then we use it. We use it and we serve. And this passage is just a powerful reminder that there is the miraculous in our ordinary lives when we come back home. Right? Jesus is present there, and there are hints, there are signs of the resurrection. Right? It's easy to think about when we go out and we remove ourselves and we slow down, but in the midst of our everyday lives, our day-to-day, the ordinary, Jesus is there, and there are signs, if we want to look for him, that point us towards the resurrection because it's present. Jesus has come. He is coming again, but he has come. And so let us celebrate the resurrection in our everyday, daily lives. And it takes work, right? It takes work to look for this around us. We have to look for awe. One practice is to use a gratitude journal, right? To stop at the end of every day and to look back over the day before, the day that has come. And what are ways that we can be grateful? Where did we see God at work? This is the prayer of examine, right? Where did you see God at work in your life? And where did you maybe miss God at work? But it helps to train our eyes and the eyes of our hearts to look for signs and hints of the resurrection that is going on around us. May we look for the extraordinary. And we say, well, how do we do that? How do we train ourselves to do it? And we look, Jesus teaches us, right? So, picking up in verse 35, and rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. Right? In the morning, Jesus set aside time, and he went out and he prayed. Right? And he's setting an example, right? Prayer is such an important part. It is an intentional part of his life. He goes out to pray, right? Prayer didn't just happen in the midst of doing other things, which is the way I often try to think about it is, how can I pray in the midst of doing something? It's important to do that, but it's also important to set aside a time, to be intentional, to have a routine, to have a practice to pray. Right? And we say, oh, well, we're so busy. It's hard to compete with the business, right? Jesus literally had people from the entire region coming and bringing their diseases to him, right? Everybody was coming and bringing their problems and their illnesses to Jesus. He was swamped with this. And yet, he set aside time to get away and pray. And so busyness, we can't really use that as an excuse because Jesus was busier than we are. But he was intentional about setting aside time, right? To focusing on that relationship, to training himself to look for the extraordinary in the midst of the ordinary, to point towards the resurrection. That was what he did, right? And it doesn't have to be first thing in the morning. Some people are morning people. Jesus was clearly a morning person. If you're not a morning person, it's okay. It doesn't have to be the morning. But the important thing is that you're being intentional about setting aside time to pray. Right? It teaches us to be in constant dialogue with God, to have this time. And Charles Spurgeon says, woe unto the man whose devotion is observed by everyone, who never offers a secret supplication. Secret prayer is the secret of prayer, the soul of prayer, the seal of prayer, the strength of prayer. He says, if you do not pray alone, you do not pray at all. Your heart must speak with God in secret. There was someone else who said there is in public and private prayer a more united strength and interest, but in secret prayer an advantage for more free and full communication of our souls with God. Right? Individual prayer is so important. It is about sustaining a life of faith, right? Building our relationship with God, training our hearts, training our eyes to look for the resurrection in the midst of the ordinary. And we say, well, what do we think Jesus was out praying for? And this amazing thing is that Jesus was praying for you. That's who he was praying for, is that Jesus has you on his heart and his mind. He's seeking you. He's laying down himself for you, right? He's giving up his freedom to serve you. And so he has you on his mind, on his heart. So he went and he prayed for you. And so we should be in awe of that, right? We were at this observatory and looking at the wonders in the skies. And it was incredible to see the stars and the distant galaxies. And then God made all that. And yet here is God setting aside time, and he's praying for you. He's seeking you out, right? All these parables about lost things are meant to teach us that God seeks us out because we are the lost. It makes me think of we were at this ATV ride. And so we were going to be riding through trails for 2 hours, and the guide comes up and he says rather bluntly, he goes, there's 12,000 acres here. He says, if you get lost on any of the trails, he goes, just stop. He goes, I know the trails better than you. I will come back for you. And Rachel and I kind of looked at each other and were a little concerned about getting lost, but we had a guide. We had a guide who knows the trails and who will come back for us to make sure we get back to where we need to go. And that's what Jesus is teaching us in the Gospels, is that we have a guide and he has come back for us. We who are lost have a guide who risks everything, who gives up his own life to come back for us, to save us. We don't know the way, but Jesus comes back for us and he prays for us. And so may we too set aside time to pray, to teach us to see the hints of the resurrection, the signs of the extraordinary things that God is doing. May we stop to pray, for in stopping, right, it helps us realize that Jesus comes back for us.